Price Fixer stuck his head in the cafeteria door.
"Minute?"
he asked.
"What is it?"
Muldoon replied.
"Peter Jackson is out here. He told the associate editor I spoke to on the phone. He just told me something about his last meeting with Joseph Malik, the editor, before Malik disappeared." "Bring him in,"
Muldoon said. Peter Jackson was a black man, truly black, not brown or tan. He was wearing a vest in spite of the spring weather. He was also very obviously wary of policemen. Saul noted this at once and began thinking about how to overcome it. And at the same time he observed an increased blandness in Muldoon's features, indicating that he, too, had noted it and was prepared to take umbrage.
"Have a seat,"
Saul said cordially.
"and tell us what you just told the other officer."
With the nervous ones, it was sound policy to drop the policeman role at first and try to sound like somebody else, somebody who, quite naturally, asked a lot of questions. Saul began slipping into the personality of his own family physician, which he usually used at such times. He made himself feel a stethoscope hanging about his neck.
"Well,"
Jackson began in a Harvard accent,
"this is probably not important. It may be just a coincidence." "Most of what we hear is just unimportant coincidence,"
Saul said gently.
"but it's our job to listen." "Everybody but the lunatic fringe has given up on this by now,"
Jackson said.
"It really surprised me when Joe told me what he was getting the magazine into."
He paused and studied the two impassive faces of the detectives. Finding little there, he went on reluctantly.
"It was last Friday. Joe told me he had a lead that interested him, and he was putting a staff writer on it. He wanted to reopen the investigation of the assassinations of Martin Luther King and the Kennedy brothers."
Saul carefully didn't look at Muldoon, and just as carefully moved his hat to cover the memos on the table.
"Excuse me a moment,"
he said politely, and left the cafeteria. He found a phone booth in the lobby and dialed his home. Peter Jackson looked up as he re-entered the cafeteria. An intelligent, curious black face. Muldoon was impassive as the faces on Mount Rushmore.
Mad Dog, Texas was the town where Malik thought these assassins had their headquarters,
Muldoon said.
That's where the staff writer was sent.
"What was the staff writer's name?"
Saul asked.
George Dorn,
Muldoon said.
He's a young kid who used to be in SDS, and he was once rather close to the Weatherman faction.
This is serious, Peter Jackson was thinking. Joe Malik wasn't on a paranoid trip at all. The non-committal expressions of Muldoon and Goodman did not deceive him at all. He had long ago learned the black art of surviving in a white world, which is the art of reading not what is on a face, but what is behind the face. The cops were worried and excited, like any hunters on the track of something both large and dangerous. Joe was right about the assassination plot, and his disappearance and the bombing were part of it. And that meant George Dorn was in danger too. And Peter liked George, even if he was a snotty kid in some ways and an annoying ass-licker about the race thing like most young white radicals. Mad Dog, Texas, Peter thought. That sure sounds like a bad place to be in trouble. Almost 50 years before, a habitual bank robber named Harry Pierpont approached a young convict in Michigan City Prison and asked him,
"Do you think there might be a true religion?"
"But why is George Dorn screaming while Saul Goodman is reading the memos?" Saul is no longer human. He's a pig. All cops are pigs. Everything you ever believed is probably a lie. The world is a dark, sinister, mysterious, and totally frightening place. Can you digest all that quickly? Then, walk into the mind of George Dorn for the second time. 5 hours before the explosion at Confrontation. 4 hours before on the clock. And suck on the joint, suck hard, and hold it down. 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, rock. You're sprawled on a crummy bed in a rundown hotel, and a neon light outside is flashing pink and blue patterns into your room. Exhale slowly. Feel the hit of the weed, and see if the wallpaper looks any brighter yet, any less unintentional low camp. It's hot, Texas dry hot. And you push your long hair back from your forehead and haul out your diary, George Dorn. Because reading over what you wrote last sometimes helps you to learn what you're really getting into. As the neon splotches the page with pink and blue, read this. April 23. How do we know whether the universe is getting bigger or the objects in it are getting smaller? You can't say that the universe is getting bigger in relation to anything outside it, because there isn't any outside for it to relate to. There isn't any outside. But if the universe doesn't have an outside, then it goes on forever. Yeah, but its inside doesn't go on forever. How do you know it doesn't, shithead? You're just playing with words, man. No, I'm not. The universe is the inside without an outside. The sound made by one... There was a knock at the door. The fear came over George. Whenever he was high, the least little detail wrong in his world would bring the fear, irresistible, uncontrollable. He held his breath, not to contain the smoke in his lungs, but because terror had paralyzed the muscles in his chest. He dropped the little notebook in which he wrote his thoughts daily and clutched at his penis, a habitual gesture in moments of panic. The hand holding the roach drifted automatically over the hollowed-out copy of Sinclair Lewis's It Can't Happen Here, which lay beside him on the bed, and he dropped the half-inch twist of paper and marijuana on top of the plastic baggie full of green grains. Instantly, a brown, smouldering, dime-sized hole opened up on the bag, and the pot near the coals started to smoke.
Stupid,
said George, as his thumb stabbed the smoking coal to crush it, and he drew back his lips in a grimace of pain. A short, fat man walked into the room, law officer written in every mean line of his crafty little face. George shrank back and started to close It Can't Happen Here. Like lightning, 3 stiff, concrete hard fingers drove into his forearm. He screamed. The book jumped out of his hand, spilling pot all over the bedspread.
Don't touch that,
said the fat man.
An officer being here to gather it up for evidence. I went easy with that karate punch, otherwise you'd be nursing a compound fracture of the left arm in Mad Dog County Jail tonight, and no right-thinking doctor likely to have a mind to come out and treat you. Have you got a warrant?
George tried to sound defiant.
Oh, you think you have cojones.
The fat man's breath stank of bourbon and cheap cigars.
Rabbit cojones. I've terrified you unto death, boy, and you know it and I know it, yet you find it in your heart to speak of warrants. Next you want to see the American Civil Liberties Union.
He pulled aside the jacket of an iridescent grey summer suit that might have been new when Heartbreak Hotel was the top of the hit parade. A silver 5-pointed star decorated his pink shirt pocket, and a .45 automatic stuck in his pants top dented the fat of his belly.
That is all the lore I need when dealing with your type and Mad Dog. Walk careful with me, son, or you won't have nothing to grab onto next time one of us pigs, as you choose to call us in your little articles, busts in on you. which is not likely to happen in the next 40 years while you rot and grow old in our state prison."
He seemed immensely pleased with his own oratorical style, like one of Faulkner's characters. George thought, "It is forbidden to dream again. We maim our joys or hide them. Horses are made of chromium steel, and little fat men shall ride them." He said,
"You can't hit me with 40 years for possession, and grass is legal in most other states. This law is archaic and absurd."
"Shit and onions, boy. You got too much of the killer weed there to call it mere possession. I call it possession with intent to sell. And the laws of this state are stern, and they are just, and they are our laws, and we know what that weed can do. We remember the Alamo and Santa Anna's troops losing all fear 'cause they was high on Rosa Maria, as they called it in those days. Get on your feet, and don't ask to talk to a lawyer, neither."
"Can I ask who you are?"
"I am Sheriff Jim Cartwright, nemesis of all evil in Mad Dog and Mad Dog County."
"And I'm Tiny Tim,"
said George, immediately saying to himself, "Shut the fuck up, you too goddamn high." And he went right on and said,
"Well, maybe your side would have won if Davy Crockett and Jim Bowie had got stoned too. And by the way, Sheriff, how did you know you could catch me with pot? Usually an underground journalist would make it a point to be clean when he comes into this godforsaken part of the country. It wasn't telepathy that told you I had pot on me."
Sheriff Cartwright slapped his thigh.
"Oh, but it was telepathy. Now, just what made you think it wasn't telepathy brought me here?"
He laughed, seized George's arm in a grip of iron and pushed him towards the hotel room door. George felt a bottomless terror, as if the pit of hell were opening beneath his feet, and Sheriff Jim Cartwright were about to pitchfork him into the bubbling sulphur. And I must admit, that was more or less the case.